feet and worship him. What a beautiful image that is. The response to seeing Jesus raised from the dead. They worshiped him. And Jesus replies, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me." Jesus repeats to them what the angel had already told them and what they were already in the midst of doing. Go tell the disciples, and the message, that is the message they are to give to the disciples. That Jesus is risen. And that the disciples are to go to Galilee, where they will also see him. Friends, there's a lot to see following the word "see" in our passage this morning. Matthew should not be confused here with Mark or Luke, where the women come to the tomb with spices to anoint the body of Jesus. In Matthew, they do not bring spices. They simply come to see. Now, see is a verb that means not only to perceive visually, but also to gain understanding, to gain perspective. When the women approached the tomb that morning, it is with a sense of anticipation, of expectation even. They come to see. And they see a lot. The earthquake helping them and us see the global impact of this day. The very earth itself quakes at the event. They see the angel helping them and us see this is a divine happening. The guards are stricken as if dead from fear. They see the empty tomb, helping them and us see Jesus is not there. The women have seen plenty thus far. Yet, however wondrous, it is not directly what they came to see in the first place. And that the angel communicates their mission and they gladly embrace it, running to give the outstanding news and in the living out of their mission, in the doing of what they have been told to do, it was then that they finally came to see what it was that they had originally come to see. Jesus appears to them while they are in the midst of their mission. And what I see, that I want you also to see, is that the act of seeing, perceiving, if you will, is so often just that way. Seeing sometimes only happens when and while you are going about the mission, the calling, the doing of it. The application for us, I think, has legs. We also can come to see while we are engaging in mission and while we are doing what we have been told to do. We also will come to see Jesus in new and profoundly surprising ways, perhaps only when we are immersed in the work and the mission that God puts in front of us. I'm not sure one can see very much without the actual living into God's message and mission, without doing what God asks of us. I doubt very much that seeing or perceiving can ever be accomplished solely through intellectual exercise. Translation: you can't just read the Bible and imagine that alone can transform you into a faithful disciple. You got to get dirty. You got to get in the weeds. You got to actually do stuff to grow. It is in the doing that our eyes are opened. Look, we are called to a mission. And only living into that mission will enable us to take another step in becoming the disciple that God has called us to become. There's a model of learning called loop learning, or the learning loop. First off, there are a lot of variations of this loop, but at its core, it communicates that learning, well, it's a loop, which includes phases. 3 popular ones are planning, doing, and reflecting. which then continually loop around. I am suggesting such a thing also exists for the way we mature as followers of Christ, the way we grow as disciples, the way we grow to live into God's kingdom. It necessarily includes something like planning, doing, and reflecting, with the added and substantial bonus of God being with us every step of the way. Take these women. Well, planning. They made a plan to leave for the tomb early in the morning to see. I'm sure they talked about it the evening before. They've been cooped up long enough. They're ready to do something. And then do. Well, they do it. They do get up. And they do go to visit the tomb, where they experienced so much in the doing. In the doing, God helped them see so many things, including, most importantly, Jesus risen from the tomb. And reflecting. The text doesn't speak of this in particular, but of course this encounter was rich with experience on which to reflect. We, in fact, are reflecting on this very story this morning. They did in their life as well, I'm sure. And then reflecting logically leads to another stage of planning and doing and reflecting, and the whole thing continues. Now, all three of these aspects of the learning loop helps one see, helps one learn, helps one mature, helps one grow. And in particular, I want you to notice that it was in the doing where Mary and the disciples later on were enabled to finally see what they desperately needed to see. So hopefully you see my point. In a nutshell, doing helps us become the disciples that God has called us to be. Additionally, I'd like to point out that the two Marys, in the midst of their loop of growing, I'll call it, and maturing as followers of Jesus, also impact other people's learning loops in the process. Their mission specifically was to tell the good news to the other disciples. And the message these women gave invited those disciples into their own loop of learning. For these disciples, in receiving that message that Mary gave them, they had to plan a trip to Galilee. Then they had to actually do and accomplish that trip to Galilee. Whereupon, in reflection on what God revealed to them in the doing, they start the loop. In the doing, God will meet them there also. And God will also meet us in the doing as well. So doing is a vital part of the learning and the growing loop, which this text seems to point out so clearly. Using these two women who are not known for speaking, but rather for doing, to highlight this very message. And it seems only fitting that the call for us to do is found here in the final text of Holy Week. A week which is like no other. A week where we celebrate what was done, actually, on our behalf. Holy Week and Easter is what God has done through the cross and the resurrection. God did it all for you. God did it all for me. God did it all for each of us so that we would be free. Free to be the people God created us to be. Free to choose. Jesus has set us free today. Death no longer is the final say for any of us. We are free. Yet being free, we now have to choose how to live, how to respond to that precious gift that is given. So here are two guiding commissions which Jesus gives to us during this very impactful week, Holy Week. First, go and tell. Jesus says it to Mary. Jesus also repeats it at the very end of this chapter in the Great Commission. Go and tell. Go ye therefore and make disciples. Secondly, love one another. Jesus gives that message back on Thursday at the Last Supper. Love one another. There's nothing more vital to communicating God's message than through that way of being. Live love. They will know we are Christians by our love. These are two ongoing calls to us to go and tell and to love one another. Friends, today we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. But if we want to live into that resurrection as well, if we choose to spend our hard-earned freedom in doing what God tells us to do, well, that could just change the world. Mary shows us doing what God asks us to do may be just the ticket for what we need. In the actual doing, we may then come to see. And friends, there's so much to see. He is always out ahead of us, inviting us to meet him in Galilee. And in the face of the need of our neighbor and in the care of one another and the world, Jesus is still not where we expect him to be, but rather is still inviting us to move forward and outward in faith, still promising to meet us up ahead, still reminding us that he will be with us always, even until the end of the age. Amen.
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 Hymn 108, Christ is Alive.
He is risen. He is risen indeed. Which means that Jesus is alive and present with you. Listen to what he says. And in living that calling, you also will increasingly come to see how wide and deep God's love is for you and for others. Amen.
Amen.